Hey everyone, so today we're going to be diving into this whole mindset thing, from Carol Dweck's book.
Oh, yeah, the one about how our beliefs can really shape our lives.
Exactly. Like, have you ever wondered what makes those high achievers, really tick? Like, is it all just like talent they're born with? Or there's something more going on?
It's a question people have been wrestling with forever, right? Like, are we born with these fixed abilities, or can we actually grow and expand our potential?
Right, right. It's like nature versus nurture for our brains.
Exactly. And Dweck's research really dives into that, and it turns out our mindset plays a huge role, not just in like how much we achieve.
But in our relationships too.
Exactly. It affects pretty much every aspect of our lives.
Wow. Okay. So let's break this down. What exactly do we mean by a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset?
So Dweck uses this great example from her research with kids solving puzzles.
Okay, with kids.
Yeah, and it wasn't just about whether they could solve them, but how they reacted to the challenge, you
So,
know?
like, their attitude when things got tough.
Exactly. See, kids with a fixed mindset, they saw those difficult puzzles as a threat. Like, if I can't do this, it means I'm not smart.
Oh, so it's like they're more worried about looking smart than actually getting smarter.
Exactly. And that fear, it actually prevents them from learning and growing. But then you have the kids with a growth mindset, and they were totally different. They were all about the challenge.
You're like, bring it on. Give me the hardest puzzle you got.
Yes. They didn't see struggling as a bad thing. To them, it was a chance to learn something new. It wasn't about being perfect right
It
away.
was about the process, the figuring it out.
Exactly. And that's a much healthier way to approach, well, pretty much anything in life, right?
Totally. It's like how we view a bad day.
Mhm.
You get a parking ticket, then your friend's being weird, and then you totally bomb that midterm. Fixed mindset, you're like, my life is over.
Right. They get stuck in that cycle of, I messed up, so I must be a mess.
But someone with a growth mindset, they'd be like, okay, got to study differently next time, park more carefully, and maybe check in with my friend later.
It's about action, not self-judgment. They see setbacks as opportunities to learn and grow.
It's like they're turning those lemons into lemonade, or at least figuring out how to make a better batch next time.
I like that.
Speaking of learning from mistakes, this reminds me of that football player, Jim Marshall, in the wrong way touchdown.
Oh, yeah. I mean, talk about a moment where a fixed mindset would just completely crumble, right?
Total career ender, right? But Marshall owned it.
He owned it, learned from it, and actually became known for his resilience. It's a perfect example of turning a mistake into a masterclass in growth.
He took that fumble and ran with it in
Yeah.
the right direction eventually. And, it makes you think, how often do we hold ourselves back with this idea of being naturals or gifted? Like, we hear about Mozart and we think, oh, he was just born brilliant.
Right. Or Darwin or Einstein. We put them on these pedestals, these geniuses who are just like touched by the gods of brilliance. But the truth is, it was way more about dedicated effort than any innate talent.
It's exactly
Yeah.
like Michael Jordan, arguably the best basketball player ever. But guess what? He got cut from his high school varsity team.
And he wasn't recruited by his top choice college either.
Right. So much for being destined for greatness from day one.
Exactly. The reality is he embraced the grind. He was known for his relentless work ethic. Like the guy just never stopped trying to improve.
He was like, oh, you think I'm not good enough? Watch this. And then he just kept practicing and proving everyone wrong. And speaking of practice, what about Babe Ruth? I mean, the great Bambino, right? Legendary home run hitter.
And, early in his career, he wasn't all that consistent. He had the power, for sure, but it took time, a lot of dedicated practice to really refine his swing.
He didn't just wake up a baseball god,
Mm.
right? And it wasn't just about, swinging for the fences either. He was committed to staying in shape, working out, even in the off season, which back then was pretty unusual.
He loved practice so much, it actually used to annoy his teammates. Like, come on, babe, give it a rest.
That's dedication.
Yeah.
And we can't forget Jackie Joyner-Kersee.
Ah, yes. Considered one of the greatest female athletes of all time. 6 Olympic medals, world records, competed in the heptathlon. Talk about a test of endurance and skill.
7 different track and field events over 2 days.
Yep. And when she first started, she often finished last. It just goes to show those who embrace the growth mindset, they don't focus on immediate results. They put in the work, they learn from every experience, and over time, that's what leads to those extraordinary achievements.
Her story is incredible. And it really highlights that this growth mindset isn't just about, like, sports or school. It's about how we approach everything.
Everything. Our careers, our relationships, how we see ourselves, how we see others, it all comes back to mindset.
And speaking of relationships, that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah, with relationships, it's not even just about having a growth mindset for yourself. It's also how you see your partner.
Oh, interesting. So, like, you could have a fixed mindset about yourself, about them, or about the relationship itself. Whoa.
Exactly. And if you believe that any of those things are just set in stone,
It's going to be a bumpy ride.
to say the least, like think about those couples who go in with this idea that, if it's true love, it should just be effortless.
No work required. Just like hearts and rainbows all the time.
Right. Which is unfortunately a recipe for disaster, according to, well, pretty much every relationship expert ever.
Yeah, no one's actually living in a fairy tale.
Exactly. And Dweck even tells this story about this couple. They were like madly in love, but
They had a fixed mindset about relationships.
totally. They just couldn't handle disagreements or the need to compromise. To them, any little bump in the road meant that the relationship was flawed, not that, it just needed some work, like all relationships do.
So they broke up because they thought relationships shouldn't require effort.
Wow. Yeah, talk about a missed opportunity for growth, right?
A real. And
Yeah.
it's not even just about, like, conflict either, right?
Yeah.
What about those couples who get tripped up by having, like, totally different expectations?
Oh, absolutely. Like that story of, what were their names? Michael and Robin. He found that perfect bohemian apartment, and she was dreaming of a house with a white picket fence and a brand new car.
Oh, yeah, total different visions for the future. And with a fixed mindset, those unmet expectations, those can really blow things up.
Because instead of seeing those differences as a chance to, learn about each other, find a compromise, they take it as a sign that they're just incompatible, that they're not meant to be.
It's like they're looking for reasons to break up instead of reasons to stay together.
Sadly, sometimes, yeah. And it reminds me of Ted and Karen, that case study Dweck talks about. It's like they went from seeing all the good in each other to only seeing the bad.
Because of that fixed mindset.
Exactly. Ted became fixated on Karen's supposed flaws, and Karen started seeing Ted as this controlling tyrant.
And they almost got divorced. Talk about a downward spiral.
Right, it created this awful negative feedback loop. And it was only when they shifted to a more like growth-oriented approach, focusing on supporting each other instead of judging.
That's when things started to turn around.
Exactly. It's such a good example of how learning to respond with helpful actions, rather than just slapping on these hurtful labels, it can make or break a relationship.
Totally. So we've seen how this fixed mindset can really mess with romantic relationships. But what about friendships? Does this stuff apply there too?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, friendships, they offer this incredible opportunity to learn, to grow, to support each other's development. But that fixed mindset, it can definitely sneak in there too.
For sure. I've definitely had friends where, like, maybe they didn't mean to, but you'd walk away from hanging out with them and you just felt kind of, I don't know, worse about yourself.
Yeah, like their insecurity was contagious.
Yes.
Dweck actually calls those types of people, let me see if I can remember the exact quote, casualties of someone else's need to confirm their worth.
Wow, that's deep.
Right. They might just come right out and put you down, or it might be more subtle, like always having to one-up you,
Yeah.
dismissing your achievements.
Like their own self-doubt is like a virus and you end up catching it.
That's a great way to put it. And on the flip side, the research shows that people with a growth mindset, they tend to be way better at navigating those tricky social situations.
Oh, like that study about shyness. Didn't Dweck talk about how people with a growth mindset were able to get past their initial awkwardness?
Yeah. And they actually became more likable over time because they saw those interactions as a challenge and opportunity to, learn and grow socially.
So they were able to adapt, while the fixed mindset folks, they were so busy worrying about being judged that they missed the chance to actually connect.
Exactly. And speaking of judgment and, social dynamics, that whole section on bullying was pretty intense.
It was. It really showed how, unchecked, a fixed mindset can lead to some seriously harmful behavior.
For sure. Like she talked about the Columbine shooters and how they seem to have this really extreme fixed mindset, this belief that they were superior and everyone else was, Exactly. And that need to prove themselves, combined with feeling like they were these outcasts, it tragically fueled those horrific actions.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But it's a powerful reminder of how important it is to, address those harmful thought patterns, to teach kids a healthier way of seeing themselves and others.
Absolutely. And the good news is there are educators out there, Dweck talks about a few, like Stan Davis, who are actively using these growth mindset principles to literally combat bullying in schools.
Oh, that's awesome. What are they doing?
Well, like there's this one story about a letter that this teacher wrote to an 8-year-old bully.
8 years old.
Yeah, and instead of, just coming down on him, labeling him as bad, she actually appealed to his sense of leadership.
Wow, that's smart.
Right, she even asked for his help in creating a more positive classroom environment.
What a great example of like redirecting that energy towards something good.
Totally. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from personal achievement to relationships to even like really tough stuff like bullying. But I have a question. Where do these mindsets even come from in the first place?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like, are we born with them or do we learn them?
Well, that's what we're going to be digging into in the next part. Dweck really dives into the role of like parents, teachers, coaches, all the adults in a kid's life, and how they can shape their mindset, often without even realizing it.
So it's about those early messages we get, about effort, about achievement, about what it means to be smart.
Exactly. And how those messages can either nurture a growth mindset or accidentally reinforce that fixed one.
Okay, let's get into that right after this. All right, so we're back and ready to unpack how these mindsets actually get, formed in the first place.
Right, because it's not like parents are intentionally trying to like limit their kids' potential or anything.
No, of course not.
But sometimes the way we try to support them, it can backfire.
It's all about the messaging. Even something as like seemingly harmless as praise.
Oh, absolutely. Like telling a kid, "You're so smart." Sounds good on the surface, right?
Who doesn't want to hear that?
But it can create this pressure to always live up to that label.
So then what happens when they like inevitably hit a wall or make a mistake?
Exactly. Suddenly that smart kid, they feel like a failure because they're not living up to this fixed idea of who they are.
This reminds me of that story Dweck tells about the mom and her son. He was like acing all these standardized tests, but then he was terrified to do harder work.
He was so used to being praised for his intelligence that he avoided anything that might make him look, well, not intelligent.
So he was playing it safe instead of actually challenging himself and risking like looking less smart.
Exactly. And that's the danger of praising fixed traits instead of focusing on the process.
So what should we be doing instead? Like instead of saying, "You're so smart," what do we say?
Praise the effort, the strategies they used, the choices they made. Like, wow, you really stuck with that problem even when it got tough. I'm proud of you for trying all those different strategies.
So you're showing them that learning, it's a journey, not a destination. It's not about being perfect right away.
Exactly. And it's not just about praise either. It's about how we react when they inevitably, face those setbacks.
Right, because it's so tempting to shield them from disappointment. You would be like, "Oh, honey, you were robbed. You were the best one out there."
Which, again, comes from a good place, but it's not actually helpful.
Right, because the real world, it doesn't work that way.
Exactly. Dweck tells this great story about Elizabeth, who was devastated after losing a gymnastics competition.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one. And her dad, instead of like downplaying it, he acknowledged her disappointment.
Right. He validated her feelings, but then he shifted the focus to, okay, so how can you use this experience to learn and improve?
He gave her a path forward. It's about teaching kids that. Like, yeah, setbacks happen, but you can learn from them and you come back even stronger.
Resilience.
Yeah.
It's such a crucial life skill.
For sure. And speaking of learning from mistakes, that section on constructive criticism was really interesting.
It's not just what we say, it's how we say it.
Right. Like, instead of saying, "This is such a mess, what were you even thinking?" You could say, like, "Hey, it seems like you might have rushed this part. Let's slow down and look at it together, see if we can find any spots that need some extra attention."
Exactly. You're giving them tools and strategies to improve, not just making them feel bad about themselves. And it's amazing how much kids pick up on this stuff and even like pass it on to each other.
Right. Dweck talks about how, like, the growth mindset kids, they would give each other such good advice when someone was struggling, like, "Hey, maybe try studying this way," or "Have you talked to the teacher about it?"
Right. All about strategies and effort. Meanwhile, the fixed mindset kids, they were just like, "Yeah, well, you're just bad at math." No kidding. Really highlights how deeply these mindsets get ingrained. And it's not just parents, Teachers, they have a huge role to play here.
Oh, yeah, big time. It's about creating that classroom environment where, like, effort and learning, those are the things that are valued, not just, being smart.
Like those amazing teachers Dweck talked about. Remember Marva Collins and Ray Fesquith? They had incredibly high standards, but they also created this super supportive, growth-oriented atmosphere.
And their students, they achieved some incredible things. And it wasn't because they were just, like, naturally brilliant.
It's because they were taught how to learn, how to work through challenges, how to embrace mistakes.
Given the tools and belief that they could achieve at those high levels.
Exactly. And that belief from the teacher, it makes all the difference. A fixed mindset teacher, they might just write off a kid as not a math person or not cut out for this.
Right. But a growth mindset teacher, they see potential in everyone and they figure out ways to help them unlock it.
Exactly. And it's not just in the classroom either. Think about coaches. They're in this unique position where they're like constantly pushing athletes to their limits.
Which seems like it could go either way with this whole mindset thing, right?
Right. And Dweck actually compares two legendary basketball coaches, John Wooden, who led UCLA to like 10 championships.
Wow, 10. He must have been doing something right.
Right. And then Bobby Knight, who, well, let's just say he was known for being a bit intense.
Intense.
Throwing chairs on the court, intense.
Yeah, that's intense.
Right. So very different styles, and it all came down to mindset. Wooden was all about fostering a growth mindset. Effort, teamwork, constant improvement, those were his things. He even refused to retire any player's jersey while he was coaching.
Wow, so it was always about the team, the collective growth, not individual glory.
Exactly. Meanwhile, Knight, he was all about winning, even if it meant, like, crushing his players' spirits.
Yeah, not exactly a healthy environment.
Not at all. It really highlights the damage that, like, win-at-all-costs mentality can do. And then you have someone like Pat Summitt.
Oh, the legendary coach of the Tennessee Lady Vols. She was amazing.
Right. And she actually started out with a pretty fixed mindset herself. Like, she was obsessed with winning, would get super down on herself and the team after losses.
But then she had that, like, total shift in perspective, right?
She did. She realized that her focus on just being successful was actually holding her team back. Like, they were playing it safe, they weren't taking risks, they'd gotten complacent.
Wow, because they were afraid to mess up.
Exactly. So she actually made a conscious decision to, like, embrace losing, not as failure, but as this, like, valuable feedback.
What a turnaround.
Right. And guess what? Her team went on to win multiple championships. It just goes to show, even those in positions of, like, leadership, they can learn and grow, and that shift to a growth mindset, it can have a ripple effect.
It's inspiring. This whole deep dive has been amazing. We've covered how these beliefs about ability, they touch everything, right? From how we achieve our goals to our relationships, how we parent, even how we lead others.
And the good news is, if we realize we have a fixed mindset, we can change it.
We can. So, like, we're not stuck with whatever mindset we've had up until now.
Nope. Dweck talks about this in the book. She calls it cultivating a growth mindset, and it starts with awareness. Like, you got to be able to catch those fixed mindset thoughts when they pop up.
So, like, noticing when you're being super hard on yourself or assuming you're just bad at something.
Exactly. And then you challenge those thoughts. She calls it talking back to your fixed mindset. Like, okay, brain, I hear you saying I'm terrible at this, but I'm choosing to believe that I can learn and improve.
So instead of, oof, I'm never going to figure this out, I should just quit, you'd
Yeah.
say, like, this is tough, but I'm going to keep practicing. I'm going to ask for help. I'm going to figure it out.
Yes. It's all about reframing those setbacks as opportunities for growth. Dweck also talks about the importance of, like, focusing on the process, not just the outcome.
So, like, finding the joy in learning and improving,
Yeah.
not just chasing the validation of, like, being good at something.
Yes. And one of my favorite takeaways, and she talks about this, is that idea of not yet.
Oh, not yet. I love that.
Right. It's like reframing those setbacks not as a permanent label, but as a temporary state. So instead of I'm not a good writer, it's I'm not a good writer yet.
It opens up that possibility, that potential for growth. Like, you're giving yourself permission to keep getting better. It's so powerful.
It is. And it really gets at the heart of what this whole growth mindset thing is all about, right? It's not about being perfect. It's about embracing the journey.
It's about that love of learning, that resilience, that willingness to keep pushing yourself even when things get tough.
Exactly. And the best part is it's a skill we can all develop no matter where we're starting from.
So, to everyone listening, what's one area of your life where you've been holding back? What's one thing you've been telling yourself you're not good at? How can you approach that area with a little more curiosity, a little more courage, and a whole lot of not yet?
That's what we want you to think about.
This has been an incredible deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us.